talk about Harmon Upchurch, who was head of Upchurch clan number 16. You might say that Harmon sort of fits the pattern because he was born in Brunswick County, Virginia in 1840. He married there. He had one child born there. He inherited land there, and he moved to North Carolina. This was very similar to the pattern for his siblings as well as for a number of his cousins. We've become familiar with this pattern. But there were some odd aspects about Harmon worth mentioning. We have found no evidence that he served the Revolution. We would like to continue to look for that because he was of such age that he might well have served. It's also peculiar that he was not found on the 1790 census because we know that he was already married and had children, and he should have been found there. I suspect he was in North Carolina, and we'll talk more about that location in a moment. The other interesting thing is that Harmon was a unique name. We genealogists get a little unhappy having to deal with the dozens and dozens of Johns and Williams and James, all born about the same time and living in the same community, and they present a real challenge. So it's a very pleasure to have someone come along named Harmon. As far as we know, this is the first time this name was used in the family. Let's take a look at the 5-generation chart to see how he did fit into the family. You will note that we moved from Michael Upchurch I to Richard to John I to James III and finally to Harmon Upchurch. And you will see there that James Upchurch, his father, was head of the Southampton branch of the family in America. He was a great-grandson of Michael Upchurch, the original immigrant. James lived all his life in Brunswick County, Virginia, having been born there in 1724 and died in 1784. We are fortunate that James Upchurch III named his children in his will, in particular Harmon, the one we talk about today, and he also gave him land. This is extremely important because it allows us to link the generations together. Let's take a look at a special map we prepared for Brunswick County, Virginia, where we've highlighted a certain section of the county. You'll notice there that the county is bounded by a river on the north and by the North Carolina line on the south. And in this central part of the south central part of the county, we've highlighted an area, and we suspect that is where the Upchurch land was located. Certainly that of Harmon and his father, and perhaps other cousins may have lived close by. You'll note the proximity of this to North Carolina, so it wasn't much of a trip for them to shift from Virginia to North Carolina. Now, Harmon did inherit land from his father, but he sold it in 1788, and we believe he was in North Carolina when he sold that land. And the fact that we're able to link together the specific acreages and locations and neighbors allows us to be more sure that the Harmon Upchurch we talk about in North Carolina was the same Harmon Upchurch that occurred in Brunswick County, Virginia. Let's look at a map of the part of North Carolina to which he moved. At the time he moved there, along about 1785 to 1795, he moved to a large county known as Montgomery County. And we see it here bounded in green, a large county. But then in 1841, that county was divided into two parts. The part west of the PD River you see there, colored in yellow, became Stanley County, and the part to the east retained the name of Montgomery County. So although we say that Harmon Upchurch moved to Montgomery County, North Carolina, it was actually to that part near the Norwood area that was to become Stanley County in 1841 that he actually moved. Now, I'd like to take a moment here just to brag about North Carolina. It's a favorite state of mine. I was born and raised there, and my ancestors were raised there. And this particular map offers an opportunity to comment on some aspects. You'll notice on the left-hand side of this map, there's the Reed Coal Mine. Actually, it's just outside the boundary of Stanley County, but it allows us to call attention to the fact that North Carolina was famous for its gold mines in the early years before California made such a big strike. At one time, North Carolina was the greatest producer of gold of any state in the country. Now, if you look just to the right, there's an area we've highlighted with an arrow called Seagroves. And that is a very special place of North Carolina where pottery is made. And I made a wonderful trip there with my family to see that. And it's arranged in a special fashion. There is a state facility there which displays the pottery that is made in the local area. But the pottery is really made, in many cases, in little remote villages and hamlets around the community, and even in people's back rooms and barns. But they make the most beautiful pottery, and I can't help but resist show you a piece that we bought on that visit to bring home and to keep in our living room and to show the people what lovely pottery is made there. So I think that all descendants of Harmon Upchurch should visit North Carolina, and while there, go to Stanley County and at the same time pay a visit to Seagroves and buy a piece of this pottery to take back home with you to remind you of the community where your heritage was located. Continuing in this vein, on the right map you'll see a place called High Falls, and that's a very special Upchurch place. I went there to give an Upchurch lecture once. I won't tell you more about that except to say that this is an enclave of Upchurches descended from Moses Upchurch, head of the Moses Upchurch clan, and that it is famous because a certain air pilot from World War II who crashed in China and lay there for many years in a grave was returned to his home in High Falls. We shall tell you more about Lieutenant Hoyle Upchurch at some other time. Well, let's talk about Harmon a little bit more, and then first I should mention two other places beyond High Falls. There's Pinehurst on the right, which is the place where it's one of the most famous golf clubs in America. Now, most of us don't have enough money to play there, but maybe some of you can afford to go there and enjoy that. But not only is it a famous golf course, but there you'll see the glory of the longleaf pine in North Carolina, of which there's some 2 million acres. Something else to brag about. So let's move on to Norwood in Stanley County, where Harmon lives. And again, he sold his land in 1788, and probably all of his children except the first were born there. We don't have really great records on the birth dates of his children, and so we tend not to list them so we get confused. More research is needed. We suspect that perhaps he had 2 wives because the birth of the children was scattered over so many years. Now, we have produced in the Upchurch Bulletin a great deal of information about the Harmon Upchurch clan. I invite you to go to there and to the Upchurch Bulletin online and search for various aspects of the Harmon Upchurch clan. Other people have used this information as a springboard to go ahead and do more research, and have published their own work on the Harmon Upchurch family. I mentioned May Cox as one individual who has been very active in this area, and I think you will be able to find her listed on the internet and be able to reach her site and her work so that you may learn more about it. Let's turn our attention to the 5 children of Harmon Upchurch. When I first started working on these in the 1970s, about the only thing that would appear that there was a P.B. Upchurch who had some siblings who was recorded as being North Carolina and moved to Arkansas. That was about all we knew about the whole Harmon Upchurch family, because Bell West and Olive Morgan in their books didn't extend this far, so this was fresh territory to pursue. And I was soon able to dig out more information and link these children back to Harmon. It took a long time to do this, and it was only after many years of research that we finally got the last male linked into the system. Allen Upchurch, the oldest child, was born in 1779 in Virginia, and he died in North Carolina in 1848. I'd like to read you from the Allen Upchurch biofile a little note. Now, I had a number of excellent cooperators. One was a guy by the name of John Upchurch Lilly, who lived in Norwood, Stanley County, North Carolina, and I had extensive correspondence with him. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. Another collaborator was John Paul Lilly, who was a researcher with North Carolina State University. And on the 7th of March 1980, John Paul Lilly wrote to me as follows, that Allen Upchurch died June 21, 1848 in his 69th year. His grave was recently discovered in an abandoned family cemetery a few miles north of Norwood in Stanley County. Another excellent cooperator I had was Charles Edgar Crow from Texas, who was who married into the family, descending from Harmon Upchurch. And on 9 March 1985, he wrote me as follows. He had researched this grave site and says, the cemetery is on the south side of Road 1744 between Highway 525 and number 1740 in a field in a clump of trees. I mention these just to say that there's much more to be learned about the Upchurches in Stanley County, and I hope there will be some who will pursue this aggressively. Going on to the next son we have is Howell Upchurch, and he was the one from whom John Upchurch Lilly descended, and he was born in North Carolina and died there in Stanley County in 1846. There was a daughter born in North Carolina, but we know nothing more of her. We don't know her name. There was also a James Upchurch VII, who was born in North Carolina and died in Missouri, and he was one that was very hard to figure out. The little tidbit that we finally found that gave us a lead was a Hannah Upchurch who appeared on the 1850 census in Tennessee, I believe, without her husband. So James Upchurch VI, her husband had already died. But that family moved on to southeast Missouri, to St. Genevieve and to Bollinger County. I have had a wonderful cooperator in the way of Truex Upchurch, who has actually visited in my home, and he and I made a trip to Bollinger County, and he helped me find the land that his ancestors owned back in the 1880s. Now, another son was Benjamin Upchurch, and he too was very elusive. He was born in North Carolina, and we have heard pretty sure he moved on to Rutherford County, North Carolina for a period of time, and finally to Georgia. The track we have for him for sure is that his son Osmond Upchurch, who was born in 1807 in North Carolina, married in Upson County, Georgia. Now, so we have these descendants of Harmon, some of them staying in North Carolina, some of them moving on to Texas, some of them moving to Missouri, some of them moving to Georgia. And they bring a little bit of confusion because the fact that I mentioned Upson County, Georgia, brings to mind that there were other branches of the family that had representatives in Upson County, Georgia, just as there were other branches of the family that had members in Rutherford County, North Carolina. Fortunately, when they got to southeast Missouri, that was the only batch of Upchurches there. I do find members of that group in the St. Louis area, some of them prominent lawyers and serving in other capacities in our local area. So we've given you a sort of a thumbnail sketch of Harmon Upchurch and his family and how it moved along, and I hope others will be willing to join us in this quest for learning more about this very interesting individual. Thank you for listening.